Hello, everybody. It is November 26th at 7:02 p.m. EST, and you're watching the Dovecote with Sam Sorensen uh, of Cataphract and Over Under and various other works. Sam, please. I know I kind of already introduced you, but if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sam Sorensen. I am a game designer, I guess, and I write role-playing games, and I edit role-playing games, and I do graphic design for them, and generally have been around the block a few times now on a number of projects.
Hell yeah. I think my awareness of you, and I suppose this is a little bit of recency bias, but definitely, I mostly became aware of you through Cataphracts, which I think literally the last guest because the show has been like on hiatus for a month. Jay Dragon mentioned, and yeah, we had a conversation last time about Cataphracts.
Good things, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jay was talking over the moon about it. Um, and as someone myself who has like um, experience in like I would say almost the opposite side of play by post, which is like very intimate erotic play by post.
Well,
It's
intense.
yeah, it's often with like uh, its own kind of mechanical rigor. I have like a deep appreciation for that mode of play. I'm curious, like, what led you to actually first? Do you want to kind of explain to the audience like what is Cataphracts?
Sure, yeah. So Cataphracts is a real-time play-by-post sort of logisticsy operations scale war game. So what that means is that you play a commander of an army. My game is sort of in like a Eastern European medieval setting, roughly in sort of the 14th century. But there are lots of other games that are in different time periods and different settings as well. But you play a commander at the head of an army, and you belong to one of multiple factions, and you march around, but it all happens in real time. So if you wanted to march from point A to point B, and those, if from a fortress to a town, and those two strongholds were 50 miles apart, if you left Monday morning, then I would message you roughly Friday afternoon and say, "Oh, you've arrived at point B," because armies march 10, 12 miles a day, and
Mhm.
so assuming it's a relatively straight shot, those 50 miles take about 4.5 days to get through. And so everything in the game is played on this real-time clock of marching and messengers and supplies and battles, and all of these things happen in real time, just played over Discord. And so as a player, you have one channel with me as your referee, and I message you things like, "Your scouts have spotted an enemy army 15 miles to the north," or "Your supplies are running low," or "You receive a letter that says X, Y, or Z," and so on. And so it's quite crunchy on some level. You really have to deal with like marching speeds and the number of supplies you have. But battles are really straightforward. They're basically just like a simple 2d6 roll. And then a lot of the kind of drama of the game ends up being in questions of coordination and communication and alliances and treaties and politics of even the simplest things of like, hey, we two commanders are going to meet at this place at this time is remarkably difficult to do because marching is hard because there's snow and you get lost and you
Mhm.
get confused and you get raided and all these things. So it's this sort of like it's a simulation of warfare and combat and a campaign, like a military campaign, that operates kind of like one level higher from what we traditionally think of in like a skirmish scale war game, like Warhammer or something like that.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things that you mentioned in the design blogs, which actually I should um, I'm trying to think of the best way to post them because three links to one and two, but I'm just going to post your blog and folks can find them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but one of the things that I found really fascinating was the idea that um, players with players with the most simple strategies often were the most successful, not necessarily those
Oh
with the
yeah.
most elaborate tactics or best armies or best generals. Um,
Yeah. Like really complicated maneuvers can be incredibly effective, but really complicated maneuvers are very difficult to pull off. Of when you need four different commanders and they all need to be talking to each other, and they all need to be in rough synchrony in their time and place. And you can't see any of that because you really can only see like what your scouts can see within, 15, 20 miles of your column. That level of coordination just becomes very difficult. And so, as I mentioned, punching straight up the middle is oftentimes very effective because that means you can keep track of everything.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, are there any sort of like design philosophies or even specific games that you would kind of call to as influences for cataphracts?
Yeah. So on a basic level, and I'm not the first person to do this. I knew about one or two games that had done it beforehand, and I've since been lots of people have been sending me other war games of boxed war games from the past few decades, or sort of like mega games that have been run as live games or whatever. But basically, Cataphracts was born out of a desire to fill what I perceived as a gap in kind of the simulation. To get into the details here, Clausewitz, the military historian and theorist, argues and sort of defines warfare as happening basically on three levels. But at the top, there's strategy, which is why you go to war and what you're fighting over. So this might be we're taking territory, or I'm fighting for the throne of Spain, or whatever. And then at the lowest level, there's tactics. And tactics is like how you win the battle.
Mhm.
And there are lots and lots and lots of games that cover one or sometimes both of those. Of high level strategy games like Civilization deal with strategy, and low level tactics games like basically every like quote unquote strategy game ever made deal with tactics. But in the middle is what Clausewitz calls operations. And operations are like the logistics of war, of how do you get, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people and animals and supplies and equipment and, all this other stuff from wherever it starts to wherever it needs to get to. And so Cataphracts is sort of filling that gap a little bit of it is about these gritty, annoying, complicated details of keeping people fed. And it's about the sort of like fine detailed questions of like how fast does it take to get from this town to this border crossing or from this river bridge to this port where we need to go. And so it means that while there is some question of strategy, but like mostly I just gave my commanders their starting objectives. If I said, you're fighting to take the holy city, you're fighting to be free of the empire, whatever. And then tactics are mostly just sort of skimmed over. They can put some basic tactics in when they make the battle roll, but battles are really simple. And but what's complicated is the operations scale of all these logistical questions of how to make the war actually work. And that has turned out to be very like juicy and exciting and led to a lot of sort of like complicated, sort of difficult to parse at a distance, but very cool, emergent, unexpected plans and ideas and drama.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe, at any given moment, it doesn't necessarily feel like you are, as a player in this game, right? I imagine it doesn't necessarily feel like you're making really interesting narratives, but you as the facilitator, I imagine are able to see a lot of that.
Yeah. Although, for what it's worth, like, there are definitely times where, especially over the course of, a few weeks, a set of events will happen, and it's only until I have seen all of them and have, like, looked at it from a distance that I can actually understand, like, what occurred. In my game over the summer, there was one point where there was this peasant leader and there was this order of knights and they were fighting each other, and then there ended up being sort of an imperial army that came in between the two of them, and then later the imperial commander like spirited this peasant commander off on his horse through the night to evade a trial that was involved with like a trial by combat and all these things. And in the moment, because this drama took place over the course of like a month, it just sort of looked like a series of actions to me. Players were just sort of doing what they were going to do. And then only later did I realize I was like, oh, this is a breaking point between the Knights of this holy order and the empire that they are kind of on paper sworn to serve. Like, this is this imperial commander siding with these peasant revolutionaries against this knight in like a very dramatic way. But it happened so slowly that until it was over, I didn't know it was happening.
That's very fun.
Yeah.
I a video game I still have not played, but I brought up the last time Cataphrax was brought up on the show. Um, that there's a video game called The Longing that I've been fascinated about for years, which is a game where ostensibly your goal is to watch over a sleeping child for 400 days. Um, like 400 real days, right?
Sure,
And you
yeah,
can
yeah.
speed things up by doing various things. And I think like the thing that makes me think about cataphracts is just like that amount of time. If you were to actually sit and do that for 400 days, is like is massive. And you mentioned in blog three a bit about how like on the best days like you're seeing these narratives kind of take form, and then on the worst days it's like, oh fuck, this is an errand, right? um
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
and I'm kind of curious, like how, and you're welcome to repeat things from the blog, but like, uh, like how, how did that like time scale kind of affect you as a facilitator?
Yeah, it basically has become it's like tending to a pet, really.
Hmm.
Of if you imagine you have a dog or several dogs, and every morning they need to be walked, and every evening they need to be walked, and you got to feed them, and you got to play with them, and you got to check in on them, and if you're going to go away for like a few days, you got to make provisions for that, and you can mess it up, you know. If you don't
Uh-huh.
walk your dog one night, it's not the end of the world, but like there probably will be consequences. And as my commanders can tell you, very often I'm messing up cataphracts. I quite regularly miss a day or even a week sometimes, and we figure it out. Of we got quite good at like we call it rubber banding of
Hmm.
like letting things from the past snap forward and like letting some retroactive orders go through and so on and so on.
Rollback netcode.
Sometimes we say like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes we say like, oh, I am 3 days behind. So for the next 3 days, we're gonna do like 2 days per day of
Hmm.
now Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are gonna be dealing with like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you can kind of compress things and like it can be somewhat stretchy, but as the referee, it's become just sort of a habit of it's just sort
Hmm.
of part of my routine now of like, oh yeah, in the mornings, I come back from the gym and I take a shower and then I check on cataphracts, and in the evening, I sign off from work and I like check my discords and I do whatever and I check cataphracts and then I head to bed. Like it's just kind of part of the I have sort of built it into my basic day-to-day schedule.
Yeah. Where did that choice to? I'm curious. Like, where do you think that choice to like do the one-to-one time kind of came from?
The short version is that, well, the short version is that it came from really old D&D. Of
Hmm.
back in the day, if you look at like, especially some kind of the proto D&D stuff, like if you look at um, Dave Arneson's Napoleonics game, or some of the kind of like early Blackmore stuff, or some of these other sort of like early campaigns, they were often played in sort of quasi real time or something like it. If you run Open Table or West Marches games, and like when I was, years ago, I've run multiple sort of Open Table and West March style campaigns, and some of them I've done in real time. Where if we're in the West Marches, like you might go on a 5-day mission and then come back, which means if you leave on Wednesday, you don't like get to talk on our Discord server until Sunday or something like that. And so I've experimented with real time before, but for cataphracts, because I knew it needed to be over a long period of time, and because like information coordination was so important, and because I was running it on Discord anyway, it sort of just fell into place of like, okay, I guess we'll run it in real time. And truthfully, I've been running my main Vorea game for like I think close to 8 months now, 8, 9 months,
Hmm.
something like that. And initially, I thought it was going to be. I mean, I had no idea how long it was going to last, but I thought there was a really good chance it lasted 3 weeks and then burned out and died, or like it would last 2 months and then be over, or whatever. But instead, I've had to take breaks at point and skip things, and there's been lots of scheduling challenges to deal with, but it's still going. And like probably we could keep playing that campaign for years if we wanted to, just over the course of days or the course of months.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I want to move on to over under. I'm
Oh,
curious,
sure, yeah.
like my understanding is there's been some what do you call them, like postmortems of over under, but not
Yeah.
necessarily on your end yet. So I'm curious, like what did the thought process look like in terms of I think specifically the denizens are maybe the most like fascinating element of kind of the design of over under. Do you want to just kind of talk about like what is over under relative to cataphracts?
Sure, yeah. So over under. Um, what it ended up being was a month-long real-time play-by-post Discord kind of mega game-ish thing. Um, what it started as was, at Gen Con, like, 4 months ago, 3 months ago, whenever that was. Sean McCoy, creator of Mothership,
Mhm.
had lunch and we're chatting. And Sean was interested in Cataphracts. He was really excited about it. He's now playing in the Berea game. So we were talking about this, and he was like, "Oh, I would love for you to run something like Cataphracts for Mothership Month." Because Mothership Month, Sean is looking for more events than just crowdfunding and so on. And so I said, "Oh, sure, yeah, that'd be fun." And then he said, "Okay, the challenge is that we need to be able to fit, hundreds of players into this game of Cataphracts with one referee plausibly caps, at a few dozen players. I've had like 40 something lifetime commanders, but those are usually not been all in at once. Some of them die, some of them leave, whatever. And I think, maybe if I was doing it, for 8 hours a day as a full time job, I could handle 50 or 60 commanders, maybe. But Mothership is a huge, at least for an indie RPG project, is a huge game and has a ton of fans. And the mother server has like I don't know 3,000 users on it or something. And so we knew that Over Under was going to need to support more players. And so what we landed on was this idea of saying, okay, you have kind of your main commanders, what in Over Under we call bosses, and
Mhm.
we have the factions that they're part of, and then you have denizens who are part of those factions. And in order to give denizens something to do, they collected their daily wages and they could vote in certain faction actions and plans, thus sort of creating a space where if you were a denizen, you were far less powerful than a boss, but you could still be part of the game, you could still participate in the economics, you could still chatter, you could still be a spy, all of these things. And then what ended up happening is Over Under got, way more players than we were expecting. We were hoping to get early on we were hoping to get 1,000 people, not even in the game, but just on the server. We were hoping to get 1,000 people on the server by the end of Mothership Month. And we had over 1,000 people on the first day. And we hit our max player count at like 1,200 in the first week. And players became very invested. They spent a lot of time role playing. It took at some point we hit a sort of like critical mass of rather than like more sort of OSR leaning, more sort of war game leaning, more competitive, more I don't know, more like aggressive players, I guess you might say. Instead, there became sort of a critical mass of like people who were coming from a forum LARP culture or formal playing or LARPs or whatever. And I was talking with friends about this as Overrunner was running, and at one point one of them said like, "Yeah, Sam, you're running a digital Ren fair," and I was like, "Oh, brother."
Yeah.
um, and so what Over ended up becoming was this much more role-playing focused thing where people were planning out their storylines and they were really getting invested in their characters and they were planning scenes and there became much sharper divisions between in character and out of character discussion and all of these things that I think are very normal in forum role playing and Discord role playing, but were quite unexpected for me approaching this basically as like a large scale social war game. If I knew people were going to roleplay, but I did not expect people to say like, "I'm running a bookstore," or
Yeah.
"I'm an android with 4 arms," or "I'm going to engage in a complicated, doomed lesbian mercenary Yuri drama." Like there were all kinds of things that I wasn't really expecting over under, and thus it got somewhat out of hand pretty quickly in a way that I think a lot of players loved, but was often quite stressful for me and my like wargaming buddies that I had brought in.
Yeah, was any of that, I suppose, useful to the initial goals of Ever Under? Was any of the sort of more roleplay stuff useful to the initial goals?
So my whole sort of like philosophy of RPG design generally is that like I, as the designer, don't get to decide what the game is about.
Uh-huh.
If you pick up one of my books, if you pick up Time After Time or Seas of Sand or Low Life or whatever, like that's your book. It's at your table. You can do whatever you want with that, and I expect you to not like I expect you to not follow my sort of like goals or intent or whatever very closely at all. Certainly, when I pick up RPG books, the question that I am approaching them with is not like how can I fulfill the designer's vision, but how can I take stuff from this project and add it to my game.
Hmm.
And so this has certainly won me some ideological rivals in RPGs. But Over Under was really fascinating because like I was there, I was the referee. Like I in theory had all levers, and yet still this game ended up becoming something very different than what I as a designer had planned. And so while it was quite stressful on like a management level of like I consider myself like a decent game designer, but I'm a pretty bad event planner, and this had become more of an event than it was like strictly an abstract game.
Uh-huh.
Um, so in that regard, it was quite stressful to run, but the philosopher in me, the ethnographer, the academic in me is delighted because now I have ironclad proof that even though I made this game and I was there and I was in charge, still it got so far away from me so quickly.
Yeah, it really sounds like it became its own creature.
Yeah, 100%.
I this is the thing. My not to go back to fucking video games again, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, I a game that my girlfriend is literally playing next to me right now, Space Station 14, has come
Ah,
up quite a bit in my conversations about Over Under. Um,
yeah, for sure.
a game where you can, a normal run might be that like you get on the station, you go to the bar, you get a drink from the bartender William, and then you explode. But an unusual
Hmm.
run might be you get on the station, you are alerted that you are uh, you are a syndicate operative. You buy a bomb, you go to the bar, you kill William and the other random person who's at the bar, right? Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I'm kind of curious, like, um, I find that like the combination of like play by post role play or like text based role play and like kind of active systems, the way that those things can kind of butt up against each other, the ways that they can interact with each other, really interesting. And I'm curious if there was any like any like interesting interaction between sort of denizen stories and boss stories, or if those things were kind of more separate in your experience.
They started out relatively separate. Of the bosses were sort of engaged in this like more crunchy, rulesy, mechanistic war game. But then as those bosses died or got voted out or had to bail on the game and new bosses started coming in, many of those new bosses arriving brought with them sort of the threads of their stories that they had had as denizens. And oftentimes the people getting voted in were like the most active players. And so if I was a very active player, and very active players in Over Under, to be clear, were oftentimes clocking north of 8 hours a day in this game.
Wow.
I would come in and I would often have, existing relationships and storylines. And so there were whole like conflicts and faction drama and wars that were started or averted on the basis of somebody's, yaoi or
Yeah.
somebody's, back like people would write backstories to justify scenes that they wanted to have in the present in a way that for my sort of like post hoc, let's not plan things, let's just go sort of like post OSR simulations mindset was like quite weird. Of like oftentimes in mod chat we were looking at councils to avert war, which hinged on somebody's interpretation of something somebody had said to their lover in private that had been screenshotted, and we were like, what are they doing? Like, you know, oftentimes the more story driven bosses were making decisions that for us in mod chat, looking at their objectives that are on their faction sheets that have been there since day one seemed quite alien.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I yeah, it's funny because like I can certainly I don't know, I find myself in an interesting position because I think in terms of my own play and design instincts, I would like I can see myself really in either role, and it's like I don't know, it's fascinating to hear you talk about that, and I appreciate you being frank about it because I think it I think it's as you said like kind of philosophically like fucking fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean like it, it's it's one of these questions of like how much can the rules influence culture? And I think that a lot of designers, both in RPGs and out, tend to view culture as downstream of design. Of like if I design my game correctly and I include these things and I have these elements, then this will be the resulting player expectation. And this has been sort of the mode, I think, for certainly decades. But I think increasingly, at least to me, it's becoming clearer that oftentimes culture, particularly play cultures, exist relatively independently of what the designers intend. And so play communities will take the games that designers make and kind of create their own games and scenes and vibes with them. And I think that in RPGs, this happens really obviously because, like, what an RPG designer makes is a book, and books can be interpreted in lots of ways. But I think even in video games, you look at like I don't know if you're familiar with the with like some of the Elden Ring speedrunning scene, but like one of the
Yes,
things they do in
absolutely.
there is they do bingo, and they
Uh-huh.
have like 60 objectives that they make a randomized bingo board out of, and then they race to fill in this bingo board in Elden Ring. And that is like I think pretty clearly not what From Software intended for Elden Ring, and yet is really cool and fun and exciting. And like I love watching people play bingo brawlers because it's so fresh. And so I think that what ended up happening in Over Under is that we just had so many players in there and we had such relatively sort of lightweight onboarding. I think a lot of players were coming in and had never read the rules. The rules
Right.
were linked in the resources and we said, like, please read the rules. But because it was just a Discord server and a bot, like, you could do whatever. You didn't need to read those rules. You could just start playing like it was a video game. And so I think we saw a lot of radically diverging cultural moments and like even individual sub factions and groupings of players developed their own play cultures pretty independently. And so rather than kind of like one unified community or even one unified experience, instead we had, I don't know, probably dozens of individual groups that, had overlap and intermeshing and interweaving between them, but none of those were like strictly the same, and none of those matched necessarily like what I had written in the rules document, which is fine. But it just meant that like trying to ostensibly be in charge of that whole thing was very tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've been kind of ever since PAX U, because I ran some games on demand of my game Sapphic World, been kind of contending with similar ideas. I think partially leaning kind of in the direction of like um feeling like I'm hooking in on some level to existing culture, but like I think the thing that I've realized increasingly, I mean, like Sapphic World started out as this very like soft thing, this very like soft erotic game that I then
Hmm.
like that I really wanted to make harder. And then I brought it to tables, and people were like, "Oh yeah, like we're sisters and we're killing each other with knives." And I'm like, "Okay, hang on, wait a second. The thing that I initially
Sure.
wanted to do this was that with this was actually right, which obviously different from what you experienced with Over Under. But I think it's really interesting, like how, as you say, like how divergent like culture can be from design. And I am tempted to agree with you in terms of um you can't necessarily design a culture. You can only design a game, and people are going to do what they will with it, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, you mentioned Jay Dragon earlier, and like one of Jay's arguments that she and I have thought about many times
Uh-huh.
is that, like, if you take kind of like the rules or the system, quote unquote, as this more holistic thing, then like arguably the job of the RPG like book is to help you interpret the stricter rules correctly, or like
Mm.
as the designer intended. Of if you pick up, I don't know, Starcrossed, Alex Roberts' like romance Jenga game,
Yeah.
and you read those rules in a plain text EPUB document, that's going to vibe differently than if you have the printed book in front of you with lovely full color, cute art in it of various characters playing Jenga together. Just as, if I'm playing, you could play, say, Warhammer with coins and cardboard, but playing Warhammer with like all your little like painted models is like a very different experience. And so I think that there is an argument that like the the reason to get involved in art direction and production and all these things is to help your players kind of interpret what you mean more accurately, maybe. But I also think that that can trend towards like I hesitate to say authoritarian, it's a little extreme, but like it's easy for a designer to get very obsessed with ensuring that players are playing correctly. And I think that lots of RPG designers oftentimes have a very specific experience. They're interested and are dedicated to communicating, and so spend a lot of time ensuring that their players are playing in the way that they are, quote unquote, supposed to. And I don't really vibe with any of that. I'm much more
Yeah.
interested in saying like, here are some cool toys I made. Go play a game with them. But I think that often clashes with a lot of existing sort of RPG design philosophy and craft and culture and so on.
I think for me, it's one of those. Do I have the "it depends, man" tweet like on demand? I hope I do. Hang on. We're gonna we're gonna see if I.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. I know what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about.
The it depends, man tweet.
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like this
yeah.
is one of my "it depends, man" things. In I think in the sense that like, oh, here we go. Yeah, I literally have it on the. I have it ready because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I come at things from this angle so often. But like, I think I have this like I think personally I come from things as a designer with like a kind of I suppose healthy fascination in like what people wind up doing, even if I'm designing like for a specific experience or at least like a specific like table tone. Um, and so I think like I'm personally like very interested in both like finding how people actually play games and then also like uh doing a little bit of fucking like propaganda, doing some politics
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
to my players. Um, I want to read Seda sent a message here. Also, hi Seda. Um,
Hi, Seda.
Multiple play cultures and expectations coming together is something I find so thrilling and cool to talk about. The stress for me in general, but also specifically in my over-under experience, comes from people refusing to recognize that they are in fact carrying their own expectations in and therefore can't understand that other people's might be different. Encouraging designers to let go a bit is important. Communicate your vision as best you can, but then put it down. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that that's true. I think that's true. Look, I mean, I broadly agree with you, Seda. I guess the thing I would say, and here I would point to like, I'm about to drop some game studies references, so
Mhm.
so brace yourself. The thing that I would say is I would point to Bernie Jacobin in not Rules of Play, in the Well Played Game, where one of the things that Jacobin emphasizes over and over again is that you need clarity. Like if
Mhm.
we aren't clear that we're playing, or if we aren't clear what game we're playing, things get quite difficult. And I think that oftentimes in over under, people were coming in with, I mean, including me, very often, were coming in with quite diverging expectations, and without, the seconds, minutes, hours of sort of communication and figuring out what that clarity was where we got upsets. And obviously, a lot of that's on me. Of if we were going to do over under again, I would spend a lot more time and resources like making onboarding tools and explaining kind of like what this event is and how it kind of not should go, but might go. By the end of it, Sean McCoy was like putting out these sort of silly tongue-in-cheek graphics that were like, here are your odds of being betrayed, or here's what you might spend your time doing. Because we had players who, would get betrayed or would get kicked out of a faction or would get deceived and be really upset about that. Of they were hurt that like, there was a moment where one of the union bosses unilaterally kicked out like 50 mob members. And he did it in this like slightly questionably legal way. Not game legal, but like faction bylaw legal.
Okay.
And it was a really cool moment in my mind because it was like, whoa, the union's purging, like it's this really intense political moment. But a lot of those mob players were then quite upset because they were like, what do you mean I can't be in the mob and the trade union? Like, why did I get kicked out? Like, I had friends in the trade union. Like, there was this moment of they, many of these players did not have these sort of expectations or preparedness or idea that, like, oh, you might just get betrayed or like, oh, you might just get kicked out of this faction because you're doing something that doesn't seem wrong to you, but is viewed
Hmm.
as wrong by like the wargame commanders. There was this other moment that like was really baffling for me towards the end of the game where in the church there was a cardinal who had risen pretty high in the ranks of the church and was regularly getting handed, millions of credits to go deal with various church function things, and in one of the last few days, they took the money and ran,
Mm.
and that was really cool. I was a big fan of that. But then the thing that really threw me was, I can't remember if it was right before or right afterwards, but right around the same time they did that, they posted a big long message out of character saying like, "Hey guys, I just want to let you know that I'm betraying all of you. No hard feelings. This is like where my character arc was going. I really had a great time with you. I hope that's chill. I'm totally cool if you want to like assassinate me or whatever. But like, thanks so much. This was my whole plan the entire time." And
Uh-huh.
that was really baffling to me because I was like, why would you betray the faction and then tell them? Like, doesn't that defeat the purpose of betraying them? In
Yeah.
my sort of like competitive war game mind, but for these for the role playing audience, of course you would tell them because like you got to coordinate the scene. You got to know how to play it, and that
Yeah.
tension I think never really left over under.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's so interesting because I think like I've seen the same kind of arcs happen because my girlfriend gives me up to dates on like a bunch of uh niche Space Station 14 server drama, and without going
Hmm.
like too
Hmm.
deep into it, like a lot of it is about like you know, is salvage a like combat game or is it a is it a scavenging game?
Hmm.
And like is Space Station 14 a game about toys or is it a game about dolls? Um, and I think that's really fascinating. I also kind of talking to the some ideas about like game design as like a thing that you can like kind of guide people with. I played a like Contact is Our Aesthetic erotic vampire LARP 2 weekends ago called Monstrosity, and
Okay.
one of the things that was really fascinating about that was like there was so much like just like really great workshops, a lot of like adjustment, a lot of talking to the entire group of either humans or vampires and being like humans want more of this, vampires have talked about this, like having conversations about like what do we all want in the larp, what things are we moving more towards, what things are we moving away from. um and one of the things that happened in the run that I was in was I can't use names, but in the first night, it's a 2 night thing. In the first night there was some broad issue with like vampires kind of just like holding humans, for long periods of time and not kind of
Sure.
circulating them. Um,
Sure.
and there was one specific player who was basically just there to like fuck their girlfriend or fuck their partner. Um,
Sure.
and like there was no circulation happening because of that. And that person was not like interacting with any of the other humans. They were really just there to do that. And so between night one and night two, there's a lot of conversation about like, hey, we need to be like circulating humans more. Like, let's get on it. Night
Okay.
two, night two, that person does the same thing, and it's like, I mean, other people, kind of, got into what the game design was directing them to do. Those conversations worked on most people. Um,
Sure.
but there was still there was still one person who it didn't work on, and so
Sure.
I think like uh yeah, like speaking to what you're saying about the the infographics, like what to expect, and still kind of seeing people being upset or people being like very protective of others' feelings. Like I think that is there's sometimes only so much you can do.
Yeah. One of the one of the angles that I often return to on this question is thinking about jamming. Like I don't know if you've
Hmm.
ever like jammed with musicians or anything, which
Oh
I've
yeah,
only done a
yeah.
little bit. But one of the things with jamming and with like improv is that I find that it's like it's much cooler in my mind when we don't have to stop and talk about it.
Hmm.
Like if we're grooving and we have somebody who has some kind of rhythm laid down, and then we have a couple instruments that are kind of noodling on top of that, and somebody's doing vocals, and like we have a flow going. Stopping to say like, hang on, guys, like let's talk about what we should do next. To me, really, it takes away from the vibe. And I find that if you're doing improv or even just sort of like regular old D&D role playing, like stopping to talk about it, at least for me, takes away some of the magic of like part of the challenge, part of the goal, part of the sort of the thing we're striving towards, at least in my mind, with a lot of more role-playing oriented games and activities, is like, how well can we do this without stopping to talk about it? And I realize that in some cases, that's one, that's just like not the goal. And two, especially, if you're talking about more erotic subject matter, like you just need to talk about it because people are going to get hurt otherwise. But in my mind, like I love seeing things emerge that nobody really planned or expected. In my mind, saying, let's do this scene and then we just do that scene is not very exciting. Like I would much rather discover it as we go rather than planning it out ahead of time.
Yeah. I agree. I want to kind of as as one of the erotic games people, I want to kind of because I've actually been thinking a lot about this recently since playing Monstrosity, which is a game that actually doesn't really have you talking a lot, but besides aside from the workshops, really doesn't have you talking a lot about like what you want or what's going to happen or like talking things out. It's really a lot of
Hmm.
things happening and then natural reactions. You might get touched by someone in a place that you don't want to get touched by, and that is gonna happen. Like it's not a safe environment, and it's not a comfortable environment, or not a safe or comfortable game. It's a risky game, um, and I think that broadly the way it, to my estimation, whatever the subject matter is, but I think especially in erotic games, the way that you get away from constantly talking about it is saying like shit is going to happen and we'll have like methods to talk about it if things go awry or if we're uncomfortable or not even if we're uncomfortable if we push past a limit specifically I think is the language I want to use um and I think also having like assumptions about what might happen is good. So, point being, I think that there is actually a lot of utility um, in thinking about games with more difficult subject matter in terms of the same thought process of like how do we do this without talking about it, um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
only talk about it when when something goes wrong.
Yeah. And I think that, again, like, not to harp on this too long, but I think that for a lot of designers and even some like referees and facilitators who have a specific experience in mind, like it's very common in an RPG book to say the goal of this game is to feel this, or the point of playing this game is to experience this story. And I think that to some extent, like stating that outright, like does help guarantee that that's what the game is about, because most RPG players are very obliging to the designers whose games they play. But I think that that kind of just outright stating what the themes or the intentions are can sometimes sap the magic. And I think that in some cases that's not always true. Like I think that particularly in more, you might say more sensory experiences, be that an erotic RPG or ziplining, like
Yeah,
then the point is to do it, right? The point is to experience it like in your body, distinct from like your imagination. But in a classic role playing game where like nothing is embodied, we're just sitting around a table eating Cheetos and talking, and it only happens in our imagination. To a certain extent, like to plan something is to do it. You
yeah.
know?
I was playing Praise the Hogmoth King with Sage the Anagogue
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
PAX, and I early on I was like, so what are we using for like risk, right? Or what are we using for safety? And Sage was basically just like, if something's up, we'll talk about it, right? Um,
Sure.
and I think like I think that allowed a lot of things to be like, yeah, this horrible thing happens, or my character does this horrible thing. Like, there wasn't like, is it okay if I do this horrible thing? Are you all okay if I do this horrible thing? I just did that horrible thing. Are you all okay with that? We can retcon that. It's just like
Hmm. Hmm.
you do the bad thing. You do the thing broadly. I think I very much very much in agreement with you in terms of like that kind of approach. I think there's a lot of value in as you say like planning to do the thing is doing the thing.
Yeah. And I think that like one of the things that I've noticed, I really noticed going from my, I hesitate to call it a home game, but like,
Mhm.
my Varela campaign in Cataphracts, like I am running on a server that I've been on for like 5 years. And like, is a big server and it's kind of like semi-private. Like people can join if you just find a link wherever it is. And so like we get new people sometimes, but like the core people on this server are people that I've known for a long time. And like a lot of them are people that I've like worked with or we've contributed to game jams together. We read each other's blog posts. Like these are people that I know and like share a lot of sort of similar philosophies and design ideals, which meant that when I said like, "Oh, hey everyone, like I'm making a logistics war game set in Eastern Europe," people were like, "Hell yeah, we're on board,"
Uh-huh.
and took very little onboarding because they just sort of knew the vibe that I was going for. Like as you build a play community, it becomes easier and easier, I think, to push like the limits of your play because you know each other and you know how you think and you know how you talk. Whereas the over under where like it was so big we couldn't have one community and it was coming together so fast, like a lot of those kind of built-in assumptions were not present, which again led to a lot of the sort of like tension and uncertainty that we saw in play.
Yeah, it's a lot of I've been thinking a lot about like low trust versus high trust games and low trust versus high
Yeah.
trust tables and
Oh, and
uh
like in over under they didn't trust me.
right, yeah. Yeah, real. Well, yeah. Okay, with that, do you wanna take a quick break and then we'll talk about PAX?
Sure, yeah, totally.
Hell yeah. All right, we will be back in how's 5?
Perfect.
Awesome. We'll be back. Hello, we are back
Hi.
with more Dovecote. Um, yeah, PAX U. I guess I'll. How's your con?
Was honestly pretty chill. I set up I got my badge and I set up my housing and I bought train tickets, and then after that I said I'm making no plans. And
Fuck
so
yeah.
my con was a lot of just sort of like wandering around and saying hello to people and a lot of like coffees and lunches and dinners and sort of just playing things by ear. Generally quite unscripted, unplanned.
Hell yeah. I think I had a similar con for the most part. I although like I kind of made plans is the thing which I don't normally do. I kind of
Hmm.
just wander
Hmm.
usually. Friday I got a bunch of people together and we did like a faggot games unofficial meetup on the first floor,
Lovely,
which is
lovely.
sick as fuck. I had a lot of really cool people there. Saturday, I ran a bunch of Sapphic World, and then Sunday, played games, got meals, saw friends. So I am also kind of just like a con roamer. Like I just like,
Yeah.
all right, so which booths are my friends at? I gotta go say hi to them. Uh, and then like maybe I'll play something if it fucking if I'm struck by a mood.
Yeah. I mean, my normal strategy at most cons is to like I sign up for every panel because the panels are always like
Oh,
free. And then if I have literally anything better to do, I don't go to the panel. But if I have nothing to do, then I go on the panel and I sit in the back of my laptop and I pay half attention to it. And sometimes they're compelling and sometimes they aren't, and I just want to network with the people doing the panel. But in general, that strategy has held pretty well for me.
how were there any like particularly striking panels this year?
No, I actually because I was busy getting coffee and sandwiches with people, I actually only
Hmm.
went to like one or two, and they were both sort of the like how to get started in tabletop role-playing
Hmm.
games, which was sort of intriguing to like hear what more like you might say like mainstream people had to say. Like the ones I went to were all sort of like 5e and Pathfinder and like third party big box kind of
Okay.
people. And their advice was like it was intriguing to hear, and they always have things to say about like direction that I don't hear the indies talk about. Of like the big people always be like, oh man, you got to make sure that like you hire your artists on the right schedule or something like
Uh-huh.
that. Whereas like indies, like you just don't have the scale to worry about those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's more about like fucking vibe. Oh shit, wait, I forgot to do this isn't news, but Cordis the Newsbird is gonna make an appearance.
Oh,
Cordis the Newsbird coming in from Philadelphia. Fuck it. Um,
wow,
wow, amazing.
Newsbird,
It's just like real life.
wow.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Like I think I think that there is a like I don't know, like if you're like a maybe this kind of shows my ignorance, but like if you're like a D&D or Pathfinder, like someone who works for one of those organizations or someone who like makes homebrew content, like basically what you're asking people, you're basically like the way to get started is to like sell your soul to maybe a bit exaggerative, but sell your soul to uh, to the company that we love.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like I think the maybe more generous interpretation is that a lot of people really love Dungeons and Dragons
Mhm.
and just like have not played much else and are familiar with D&D as a manifestation of, the rule books that are full of cool art and imagination and the game shop they go to and their favorite D&D TikToker, but like not as a business entity, not as a corporation, not as a brand. And so I have a lot of
Yeah.
sympathy for those people who are like, I mean, I remember many years ago when I was cutting my teeth on 5e and was like,
Mhm.
man, I'm gonna make my first, 12-page DM's Guild supplement or
Uh-huh.
whatever. And like that was really exciting and cool, and I was really happy to do it. And like I actually really sort of like value retrospectively, like having started there in like a very, like the DM's Guild is like a bizarre place because it's
Yeah.
drive through, but just for 5e, which leads to all kinds of like odd insular behaviors. But I
Uh-huh.
think kind of like starting there and then branching towards indie, I really appreciated because it meant that a lot of my tastes in design and play and craft matured sort of somewhat concurrently as I made things. And I oftentimes find that like when I'm really obsessed with some topic, making a game or a project about it is how I learn to be less obsessed with it, you know? Or like at least
Yeah.
how to extract the good parts and leave the rest.
Yeah, I should also say that I got my start playing D&D and
I mean, who didn't?
yeah, I think most people did. I mean, I think there are definitely some. Every once in a while I encounter someone on here who's like, yeah, so I picked up like an obscure fucking like I picked up like an obscure Vincent Baker like Google Plus project in like
Whoa,
2013. I
whoa.
got a couple of those. But yeah, I think like D&D like I think for me honestly the main thing with D&D is like being part of that culture for so long definitely gave me the ability to like kind of understand what queer people who like D&D want um
Oh yeah.
and try and like apply that to my own work while also like maintaining my own work's voice. Um
Hmm.
but yeah, it is fascinating. Anyways, this is not about PAX EU. I mean, it kind of is, but um, I sucked that it was during the marathon this year, huh?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah. It was badly timed. There were
no,
so many people out.
yeah, um, not great. Um, we definitely, I think, our experience was like this realization that one, that building is like so inaccessible, unless you have like,
Oh, it's bizarre.
yeah,
It's really strange.
a lot of entrances and not many active at one time, which I understand. Like security. I'm sure they have limited security and limited con staff, but it was
But
definitely strange.
it did feel a little like Metroidvania-esque of like, oh, to
Yeah,
get to this third floor room, you have to cross through this security entrance, take the sky bridge, or cross the street, go through this thing, loop through this corner, step into this wing, and then step back into this hallway, then take the escalator up. But that escalator's broken, so you have to go find the other one. Like there were like a
yup.
number of like weird. It felt like I was very much interacting with like somebody's level design,
Mhm.
except that it didn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's kind of absurd. The thing that I realized that like I feel like a lot of the like intentional cutoffs are really meant um to funnel people into like a specific route on some level. Obviously
Hmm.
you can kind of break off from that, but it is really made to make you see like, you know, to see all of the like consumer and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
I
yeah.
I think the realization is like maybe in 2023 when I first went, like I had some need for that. Like I had some need to be like funneled through the consumer routes, but I think next year I'm definitely getting like either a media like either I'm figuring out like if a friend is doing expo and I'll try and work a booth for a bit, or
Hmm.
I'm gonna try and do media as the Dovecote because
Yeah.
it would be so easy, so much easier to be able to go through certain pathways.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean like just at cons in general, if you look at Gen Con or any of those sort of like big ones,
Mhm.
I was never really much of a con goer at all. I only started going to conventions regularly once I was kind of like, I hesitate to use this term, but once I was sort of like in the industry, once I was like working in RPGs more or less full time. And so I've never really experienced like the total consumer side of it, or at least not totally. And I imagine it's got to be a very different vibe, just being like someone there who's purely there to play games and buy games.
Yeah, it's it's one of those moments where I'm like, oh god, I am a fucking artsy snob. Where I'm
Oh yeah,
like,
of course, of
oh
course.
look at all these D&D boys running about, and it's like that could have been you. That was basically you in 2023, except it was indie
Oh yeah,
games instead. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah. No,
yeah,
my
it's
very
interesting.
first Gen Con, I remember buying like a bunch of like Magpie projects or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But even that was, I think I came away with like a half dozen books, which is still a lot less than I see from a lot of people posting on like Blue Sky of like, oh, here are the 30 projects I picked up at pack. And it sort of just, I don't know. I always wonder like how many of those are getting one, how many of those are getting played, but even how many of those are being like read and sat with in a meaningful way. And like maybe it's all of them, and I'm just a cynic, but it is always a little shocking to me, like how you see those people with like the giant bags that they're stuffing with board games. I wonder, like, wow, like, do you have the most dedicated board game club in the world, or do you just like buying board games? And like, if you just like buying board games, like, I don't really besmirch you, but like, it's just it just feels quite removed from my experience of the industry and the scenes.
Yeah, I think like I think like I've had to kind of separate the art from the from even like the like indie industry, or it's like I think every time, every time I Charlie Brown try and run and kick the football as hard as I can,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
but every time the football is cruelly swept away, and the game that I've made is like just kind of a pretty object, um,
Yeah.
for most people, and I think that's like okay if like if I sell 200 copies and 36 people have like a really meaningful, you know, like sit down with someone, with someone or some people they care about and have a good game, or some people they hate. I mean, listen, I'm not gonna um but yeah, like I think that is like a success to me, even though God, I wish all 2,000 of those people like, or sorry, all 200 of those people like also had a meaningful interaction with the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is where we sort of get back to that thing we were talking about earlier, a little bit of like the question of like, is the game the object? Is the game the experience? Is the game like the thing you play? Is the game the rules? Like this is a somewhat hotly contested topic. And one of the things that to really tie this all back, look at me being a good podcast guest. One of the things that I really
Yeah.
loved about Over Under is that Over Under were like was not its rules. I had people afterwards asking me like, "Oh, Sam, can you like send us all your materials?" And a lot of them were shocked at how thin those were. Of like, I gave the bosses pre-written characters, and most of those character sheets were like less than 100 words.
Yeah.
The rules are like 8 pages. It's like the bot was a little bit complicated. There were a few sort of technical tricks, but like in general, people were surprised at how little there was to the game. And Cataphract is sort of the same way. Cataphract is like a ton of spreadsheets. Like there's a lot of like stuff, but in terms of like the actual materials you need to start playing, it's quite lightweight. And really, like the magic of the game is not in fulfilling the engine of the rules, but rather in like the things that occur as you play in your particular instance.
Yeah, they really are these like separate things, the I mean, I think especially for Over Under, because I think it had such an interesting collision with like culture, as you were saying earlier. Um but even in small ways, like fucking one of the things that I actually probably need to do more testing on, but one of the things I tested with Zappic World is like, what if no one who had ever seen it played ran it? And so Zappic World is like this fantasy game with like really distinct like characters, like fully written out characters, like
Hmm.
NPCs.
Hmm.
Um, and my thought was always that the NPCs were like just they were randos. Like even the ones with really interesting names and stories were like just kind of guys that you met in this fucked up world. And the
Hmm.
fascinating thing that I found was that when I listened back to the recordings, it was like, who's Philip? And it's like, oh, they like made smaller character. They made like smaller NPCs to dot around these characters that I had written. And afterwards, I was like, hey, gang, like why were you so reverent towards like the rope merchant, the weird golem pervert who likes tying people up? And they were like, I don't know, like that they seemed he seemed important. And it's like it's yeah. Even in really minor ways like that, I think you'll find that there's a bit of kind of mutation that happens once text uh once rubber hits road.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think that like that can be really beautiful in a lot of ways. It just requires a certain level of like relinquishment from the designer. Of I have to acknowledge as the designer that like I'm like you're it's not so much that you're playing my game as much as like you are making a game with whatever sort of like nodule of an object I gave you.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think something that I really appreciate about like the way that you've spoken about um like what happened with over under here is like you've made it clear like that it wasn't your intention and like there were some areas of friction because of it, but also I think that there's a version of this that's very easily like, God, these fucking like roleplay centric freaks invaded my game, and it's like, no, I really, I like deeply appreciate like how aware you are of like the fact that this was gonna happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the moment, there may have been a few group chats I was ranting in, but like I
That's
also
okay.
acknowledge that like it's the referee is but another player, like
Hmm.
and over under was also like a little unusual of like I think if it had been just something that I was running myself for fun,
Hmm.
like I might have pulled the ripcord earlier one way or another and been like, hey gang, like I might not be the right person for this. But because it was like an event for Mothership Month, it felt like it was important that I adapt more heavily than I might in just a home game.
Yeah, I do you think the Penny Arcade guys ever thought about that with PAX, or do you think they're like they fully believe that like this is their calling?
I mean, I assume they're just riding the big money train all the way to their Scrooge McDuck swimming pool.
Yeah. Do you think they ever
Uh,
explored each other's bodies? Sorry, sorry,
ooh,
sorry.
I kind of hope not, but maybe
Yeah,
they
me
have.
too.
Who's to say?
This is my. I forget who did I ask. I didn't ask someone on stream, but I've asked people about the Penny Arcade guys exploring each other's bodies because I think it's really parasocial, but very funny. Um, yeah, but yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else that I want to say about PAX U. Um, fuck. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about PAX U?
I think one of the things that I was sort of meditating on and don't really have any clear answers to is like I'm always curious at cons what trends we can predict in advance. Like,
Hmm.
what did I see at this con that suggests to me something about the future? And I don't really have any super clear lessons, and it's always fraught making predictions. But I think, just in the spirit of podcasting and being live, one of the things that I think both at PAX and at Gen Con earlier this year that I saw is I think we're going to see, if we're not already seeing, it might already be in this, and it's possible somebody's going to swoop in and correct me on this. But I think we are seeing a trend away from big box board games. Like the board
Hmm.
games that I saw people playing and buying and being excited about the most were like teeny tiny ones. A lot of like oink games you can play in 15 minutes. My friend Marcy Lehman's game High Tide, which is like this tiny
Yes.
like abstract thing.
This is immediately what I
Roommates and I
thought
have been
of.
playing a ton of yeah, my roommates and I have been playing a ton of Lacuna, which is this like it comes in a big tube, but like it's a small game. It's
Mhm.
this sort of like geometry line drawing game kind of thing, button shy games that are like 18 cards, like a lot of this sort of like small form factor, quick games, more abstract. I think that is one of the few trends I've seen, and I also think we are, and maybe this has already been happening too, but I think we are also leaning towards more like organized event play. Like
Hmm.
I think that, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think that like at Gen Con, like the DCC tournaments have been getting more numbers. I think we're
Okay.
likely to see more sort of like con mega games. I know it's just like running mega games and so it's on the mind, but I think that we are likely to see more of those in general going forward, both in board games and in card games and RPGs. I would not be surprised to see more large scale organized play events.
Yeah, I think that's very fun. I think mm, I'm always like fascinated by kind of different modes of play and I think that like I've historically been very frustrated by organized play because I think it's like uh uh, I don't like it's been kind of monopolized by like D&D and Pathfinder in on some level. Um but I think there's like so much, more to be done with that and kind of stories that run across and around and between
Yeah,
games.
yeah, totally.
It's sick. I'm trying to think if I fucking saw anything. I feel like my my perspective is so myopic, and like I I I think like in terms of observations at PAX U, I feel like I think every time I go to a con, I'm very surprised by how open people are to like the shit that I do on some level,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
like I think
Mm-hmm.
even the shit that like Sage the Anagogue does, the shit that that folks in like my kind of cohort do. Um,
Sure, yeah.
yeah, it's like not even just talking about like erotic games. I think that there is a um like in looking at like the games that are being sold, the games that are popular. I think that there is like maybe this is an oversimplification, but I feel like indie games for a while have been about like on some level about like fulfilling a pastiche,
Mm-hmm.
like trying to make the cool media that you like. And I think
For sure.
there's been this reorientation towards hurt and the strange and like I don't know. I'm excited to see like what the next 5 years of indie games look like.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's some like more risky stuff going on.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm excited too to see like what it ends up turning out to be.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we have mail. I'm not even sure.
Oh yeah.
If folks want to ask questions in the chat, feel free to. I will. We will answer them. I promise. You don't have to be scared. Uh,
Yeah.
I haven't gotten anything in my email. Um, Lilith, this is my girlfriend who's read your vlogs. Do you have any questions for Sam?
Hi.
She's high, also.
No worries. No worries. I know they're feeling well.
Yeah, it's real. We're gonna fucking get really fucked up tomorrow and have a bunch of. We didn't like buy Thanksgiving shit, so
Sure.
we're just having a bunch of like freezer food. It's gonna be really good.
Oh,
Um,
sounds amazing.
Getting high, getting drunk, crossfaded, if you will. Um,
Outstanding.
yeah, I think unfortunately because it's a Wednesday, I think we have a bit of a smaller audience.
No worries.
But I think I'm trying to think of like, is there anything that you wanted to talk about during the stream that you haven't gotten a chance to chat about?
I think we covered most of it. Cataracts over under culture scene expectations, vibes, Bernie to Coven. That's most of my check boxes.
Hell yeah, this was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on, Sam.
Of course. Thank you.
Hell yeah, and because it's a Twitch stream, I gotta find someone to raid. Let me see who's live, and I'll make that quick. I'm going to raid. Oh yeah, hi Mossy. Well, thank you. All right, I'm going to raid Melty Kit, who is streaming something. I don't know what it is, but go watch. Alrighty, everybody have a great night. Bye.
Remember,
Bye.
if you don't like what you see, you can change it. It's up to you, really. Goodbye, good luck, fans.